My name is Nina. I work for Friedrich Ebert Foundation. It's a German political foundation, and I will moderate this panel today. Well, what is it about? We want to talk about a worldwide energy revolution, which sounds quite big. And actually, I think in this context, we rather want to discuss how we can do it, and not if we really need it, because I think it's quite clear that we need an energy transformation. What do I mean by that? I think we can see that our energy system is in a crisis. For decades, we've depended on fossil fuels, and they've really damaged our environment, and they also damaged workers worldwide. The system is driven by big oil and fossil fuel corporations, and I think energy transformation for me means to give power back to the people to organize their energy supply independently. So I think an energy transformation, therefore, needs to be 100% renewable. We need to phase out coal, we need to phase out nuclear, but at the same time, we can't just transfer the existing system to a new form of energy, wind, solar, or biofuels, but we really also need to have a democratic structural change. It means a decentralized system which gives power back to the people. And this is what we want to discuss today. How can we do it? What resistances are there? What's the role of local communities? And I'm happy that I have 3 experts here from different countries, and I would like to introduce them to you. The first one to my left is Jonathan Neale. He's from Great Britain, and he's a co-founder of a very famous campaign there. It's the 1 Million Climate Jobs campaign. And the idea is that they want to show how they can create new jobs in green sectors and protect the environment at the same time. Well, Jonathan can explain that better, I'm sure. But what is really remarkable about that campaign is that many different actors pull together in one strand. It's trade unionists, it's environmentalists, and I think he can share a lot of experiences from that. The next expert I would like to introduce is Patrick Bond. He's from South Africa, Durban, and he works at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He directs the Center for Civil Society. And yeah, I know him for some years, and he's working a lot on issues of political economy, of political ecology, and so he also has very critical views on globalization and the current economic system. And he also has a lot of experience on alliance building in South African energy struggles, I would say. And the last expert I would like to introduce is Camila Moreno. She's from Brazil. I'm sure many of you have met her this week because she was involved in many events here. And she's an expert on green economy and the financialization of nature. She has published many articles on post-growth and degrowth issues, and has a long-standing experience with different environmental and activist organizations in Brazil. So for the sequence of the event, I propose that we hear a 10 minutes input by each expert, and then I would also love to open the discussion to you and to discuss together what kind of alliance we need to bring a global energy transformation forward. So thank you for being here, and I would first give the word to Camila.
You keep the time?
I keep the time, yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So I would like to start our debate this afternoon by proposing a question that one of the largest Brazilian social movements, which is the DEM-affected people's movement, uses to debate energy. Energy to what and energy for who? Because if we don't make those fundamental questions, we cannot enter properly into what's at stake. So first, I think we should contextualize ourselves. We are not only dependent 100% currently on an oil-based economy, as we are dependent on an oil-based civilization. Since in humanity, in our history, we started to use fossil fuels, this has date and place. It was around 1700, it's like this you say in English, in England, when you started to use systematically coal to the the first industrial revolution. Oil, which is pretty different, although are both fossil fuels, but one is liquidable, transportable, and a raw material, it started to be used around 100 years later, 150. For those used to the climate debate, we always refer to this 850 date. But actually, it took 100 years more for the oil to get systematically into the world energy matrix. It was only after the Second World War. The first 50 years of systemic use of oil in our history was to produce, you know what? Kerosene. No? Kerosene was meant to double the journey, the labor journey? Yeah, you say, how do you say it? La jornada. No, to double, because then you could work at night. So you didn't have the electricity as we have now, so you had to burn the whale oil, and then you could have the kerosene. So just for us to start to broaden up the line on how we can think of transitions, no? So Brazil used wood, native wood, as its main energy source until 1973, when there was this oil crisis, and our military dictatorship at that time decided to hear some very nationalistic scientists that proposed the first ethanol program, the first biofuels. This is why Brazil has such an experience in using that. So today, when we're talking about the energy transition and how to overcome this oil dependency, we should look not only the energy and the electricity matrix, but also how can we make where you're sitting on, what you're dressing, how your shoes look like, how we can bring electricity to our homes, how we can bring water. Try to look plastic in your everyday life. If you go to a supermarket, this is a very important experiment. It's free, you can all do it. Try to abstract plastic that it's oil, transform it, and think, how could you buy water, frozen foods, biscuits, meat? Imagine how dependent commodities are on plastic packaging and how important is the packaging itself for the entire cycle of commodities currently. No, you don't sell water, I'm sorry, we sell plastic bottles. A lot of the yogurt industry is also based on this, but this is just to provoke your thoughts. So the system and the hegemonic powers are already thinking in a transition. And we've been discussing, and I would recommend you to look after the work of ETC, a group based in Canada. Many of you may have heard of Pat Mooney, a long-standing activist on this convergency and the technology, about what is the biomass-based economy. So there is a very concrete planning and implementing of trying in the next decades to substitute oil as much as possible. And that's where biofuels come in. Because for some things, oil is irreplaceable. But for the entire petrochemical industry, more and more simulacros, substitutes made out of biomass, are being produced. Brazil has the largest factory of bioplastics. We can do everything that you can see today in plastic out of sugarcane. We produce the ethanol, and out of the ethanol, we produce the polyethylene. And out of those little balls, that plastic balls, you can fuse that and produce everything. Out of eucalyptus plantation, you can have a much more stronger liquid, that is the black liquor, the cellulosic ethanol, where you can even make aviation fuels that are already in experimental phase, of course mixed with the usual kerosene that they use for aviation. So as we know and as we are aware that the corporate world has the idea of replacing the energy without replacing the system, without replacing the power relations that sustain the system, we can start to look much more critical to what it's generally called clean energy or zero carbon energy. The debate on biofuels, which I was specifically asked to mention here because of the experience in Brazil, began worldwide, to get the momentum worldwide, with the launching of the Stern report in October 2006. So in the Economics of Climate Change report, one of the measures in the summary for policymakers that was recommended as the most short-term effective and low and cost-effective was for the countries to replace as quick as possible the largest amount of fossil fuels, of liquid fossil fuels, for biofuels. And that's why from 2007, 2008, a lot of people that are into activism and with the campaigns focus their work on trying to stop the EU energy policy, renewable energy policy, that was constructing the demand. Because it's not that you go as a consumer to some place and say, oh, what am I going to do today? Oh, maybe fill my car with some biofuels. It doesn't work like this. You need the nation state, you need a climate policy that defines a mandatory mix of a percentage of biofuels in your liquid fuels. This is how it happens. So in Brazil, currently, for many, many years, by law, 25% of our gasoline is ethanol. So it's not all the countries that are actually having a car running only on biofuels basic. Biofuels are used mainly as an additive to reduce the content, to save the oil, as I referred at the beginning. So there was this big debate about sustainability criteria. For those into the certification debate, we have dropped this a long time ago because it's not about how we do it. It's for whom, how much, and to what. So it's not the point of, for example, I'm making a comparison, sustainable GMO soy. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as sustainable soy, because soy, the mode of production of soy, is large monoculture, highly chemically content industry. Currently in Brazil, we have 24 million hectares of soy. 24 million hectares. I don't know the size of Germany, but I think it's quite impressive, no? Currently, ethanol, Brazil has 12 million hectares planted with sugarcane ethanol. About 60 to 70% is harvested by hand. So we have more than 1 million workers, migrant, that work on those fields. They have to cut by hand. There are tons of human rights reports regarding the human rights and labor violations of this industry. We are starting to mechanize, as this would clean something, And then the unions, for you to start to understand the contradictions, we're mobilizing against mechanization, because then you generate 1 million unemployed people, not 1 million climate jobs, but 1 million unemployed. What is behind the biofuels industry that is also important for you to get in the picture? It depends on land, not on marginal land or spare land, because those are all fictions. There's no such a thing as marginal land. We can always ask marginal to whom? No, because it's always, when referred to marginal, you understand it's not in the market, the land market yet. This is why it's called marginal. No? But the pressure is over the best arable lands closest to the city centers. Because nobody's crazy to produce ethanol in the middle of the Amazon, where the consumer market is in São Paulo. Just giving a Brazilian example. So the ethanol infrastructure defined a geopolitical control, because it's all with pipelines, with tanks, with processing units that depend on an industrial rate of production. And the only possible way to gain and to profit out and to make this industry more and more, to add value to the land that you already have, is imposing more and more genetically modification to increase the size of the sugar cane. This is what is happening currently, and to speed up the fermentation process. So the package of biofuels, as it is happening right now in my country, depends on the approval of GMO sugarcane. It's already in field testing. And today, as we speak, we are having a public hearing in Brazil. That is the first country in the world to approve next month the commercial plantation of GMO eucalyptus all designed to biofuels. What did they make with this genetically modified eucalyptus? You can harvest in 5 years instead of 7. So you reduce it 2 years, the harvest time. This is a big gain. But on the top of that, Brazil partnered with a Danish firm called Novozymes that produces through synthetic biology the enzymes that ferment really, really, really quickly this ethanol. What's the issue of synthetic biology is that we are talking about GMO 2.0. No? We have biofactories, we have enzymes that never happened before in nature, and if they escape, we have no idea what's going to happen because they act on the micro life of soils, of topsoils. So talk about chemical weapon. Talk about dangerous technology. I think we should look more and more to the ground to see what these things are happening. Okay. So the debate on energy and the energy revolution is directly connected to the growth imperative because from a southern country, our expectations toward how much we are going to grow is always correlated to how much energy we can offer. Because we have to guarantee, it's a vicious cycle, we have to guarantee energy offerings to attract investments, to attract the industries that want to go there, and they are always searching for the cheapest energy available. And this is why Brazil has mobilized all its effort in damming the entire hydropower capacity of the Amazon basin until 2020, because currently Brazil offers the cheapest electric energy in the world, and it's clean because it's hydro. No, it's not clean, I'm being ironic. And we have tried to debate and to implement and to lobby for decentralized energy, for local produced energy, but I don't know how it happens in Germany. I know you have a very different circumstances than us, for example, but we have by law that this is energy security. Energy security is a matter of state. So if you try to do a small facility to produce ethanol to sell to your family and to your neighbor, you are harming, you are threatening a national security law. And this is a regime of exemption, and you can be arrested for that. I could tell you more and more stories, but I think just some food for thought and for our debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camila. I think what came out very clear from your statement is that we really have to be careful what is clean energy, because you can see that we had an oil-based system for a long time, and then we go to search clean energy and we end up with biofuels, we end up with hydro, which also has severe social and ecological consequences. And I think we can see that in many countries that, we run for false solutions actually. Another example is South Africa, where the system is highly dependent on coal, and I would like to ask Patrick to share his experiences with energy struggles in South Africa.
Vielen Dank. How many of you have been to South Africa or have been at a solidarity protest? Do you know what to say when I say, Mandla? Hey, there's one. Let's try that again. Awaitu. Amandla. Amandla means power. And away to the people. But the power, the energy, the electricity especially, has gone to the mining companies in South Africa for 100 years. And it's very interesting to do the historical scan. We also had whale oil. Next to my little small house in the Durban beach, the biggest Norwegian Southern Hemisphere whale oil platform. So we did transition. 1976, even the apartheid regime agreed no more Norwegians with their violent and dirty oil. I hope we can do that with our friends from Norway again now. The point about our struggles is that these have had deep roots in the energy sector because of the intrinsic relationship to mining and the intensity of our class struggle. Maybe some of you know the name Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab. You know the name World Economic Forum. He's the head. And today he released the Global Competitiveness report. It comes out every year. And in that global competitiveness report, page 163 today, we learned that for the third year in a row, the South African working class was named the world's least cooperative. This is the gold medal in class struggle. The comrades from Brazil did well. They were 122 out of 144. South Africa won. Okay, Germans, 19. You have to start. Okay, the Swiss, are there Swiss in the room? Okay. They were the most placid proletariat. They were asleep. You're about number 21. Okay, so the class struggle is intense. And one reason is the extreme inequality. And electricity pricing is a big part of it. So some of the story of the struggle will necessarily deal with the technical question of the redistribution when mining houses have a long historical relationship. It started with our first parastatal. We have the fourth largest energy provider, parastatal, a state-owned company, Eskom, 1928. It was coal. Later, in 1984, nuclear power picks up 10%, but it's basically all coal, a tiny bit of hydro. The company began in 1928 because the big mining houses needed a state to supply the mines with electricity. It was too big, too chunky an investment for one mining house, even the Anglo-American empire. The major breakthrough for the Eskom strategy of building a grid for white South Africa, leaving the workers of black South Africa, going to the mines, back in the homelands, different countries, according to apartheid. They never got electricity. Whites did. The breakthrough to legitimize this was the World Bank. From 1951, just 3 years after apartheid began, and 7 years after the Bretton Woods Conference, the first loans by the World Bank in Africa were made. Several $100 million of loans were made to Eskom to supply white South Africa with electricity. The entire economy repaid, including the surpluses from black South Africa. So race and access was built in right from the outset and became much of the anti-apartheid struggle's spark was over the extent to which services were provided fairly. And urban protests in the 1980s began to force the regime, as the apartheid system began to reform, to give blacks electricity in the townships. But the question of the price was critical because black South Africans fought apartheid by having boycotts against payments. And those boycotts were against the white government in general, but Eskom, the electricity supplier, began to be a target. And that forced them to develop new strategies, including the prepayment meter. You must pay first. And that in turn generated an arms race in the townships in which, when after apartheid ended, with Nelson Mandela saying, now let us pay, still people refused. And the refusal included illegal electricity connections that became a very heroic part of the last 20 years of struggle against neoliberalism and the implicit privatization, the commercialization in order to privatize. That's part of not just electricity, but township water. In Soweto, next to Johannesburg, these struggles led by the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee became very famous. And by 1998, it compelled this government of Nelson Mandela to issue a new neoliberal white paper saying the price of the electricity must be cost reflective. But this was in contradiction to another huge trend reflecting the power of the mining houses, because Eskom had overbuilt by 1/3 coal-fired power plants. So they then practically gave away electricity. In the early 1990s, they had so much excess that they priced it at only 1 cent per kilowatt hour. It was even cheaper than Brazil's is now. For the biggest mining houses, there are two big ones that were operating, BHP Billiton, the largest, and Anglo-American. They got 20-year deals that were renewed in 1991. That then has become the source of this extraordinary power struggle over the price of electricity. Because there was no new generating capacity, though, from 1988 till the present, there was a huge blackout, load shedding is the phrase, in 2008. Even in 2006, one of the load sheds cost the ANC its electoral power in Cape Town, very, very important, the number 2 city. It went to the opposition. So now they've started, let's build more power plants. And even though South Africa went to the Copenhagen Accord negotiations, do you remember 2009, the COP15 said we will be cutting back 34% by 2020. That was a lie. They've been building the 2 largest coal-fired power plants in the world with your money. Because if you're Europeans, you're major contributors to the World Bank. And the World Bank's largest ever loan was made in 2010. Let me quickly review that to give you a sense of our argumentation. Because with all of this class struggle underway, much of it has been either at the level of the firm or in a community against the municipality or ESCOM. In other words, what we find is struggles in silos. They do not come out and connect the dots. There may be a solution, a united front called by the Metal Workers Union, which is in December broken away from the ruling party. But sometimes our protests, we had 1,882 violent protests according to the police last year, 10,400 incidents. We think that this is the highest rate per person in the world. These community protests are often over services. Electricity, the price has gone up 180% to pay for Medupi, the big coal-fired power plant, because of the loan from the World Bank, because BHP Billiton still gets electricity at 1 cent a kilowatt hour. Ordinary people are paying 10 times that. So very quickly, we marshaled the arguments and put a coalition together that included the wide variety of, let me call it united front analysis that we're going to need to build a transitional and a transformative power system. And it included analysis of residual racism, especially also black women in the household who couldn't afford the price increases and moved their electricity consumption back to a dirty energy. Usually it's paraffin, coal directly, or wood inside the house with all the attendant health problems, because particulates in the air create the conditions for respiratory diseases. TB flashes around these townships. People who are HIV positive, about 6 million South Africans, go to full-blown AIDS. Women are always the caregivers in these situations. So a gendered analysis became part of the story, and a health analysis. And it wasn't a successful analysis, but if there are Norwegians in the room, they at least got their government to vote against this loan. This is important because it was one of the conditions with the outgoing World Bank president, Robert Zoellick, one of the architects of the Iraq War, absolutely criminal figure. And he gave way to Jim Yong Kim, who in the WHO had been responsible for AIDS medicines generic in the early 2000s. And our life expectancy, because of that, went from 52 to 62 the last 10 years, one of the great outcomes of social struggle, the Treatment Action Campaign. But the point is, Jim Yong Kim last year said, we won't make any more of these extreme $3.75 billion loans for coal-fired power plants unless we absolutely have to. And it's one of the most interesting questions as to whether in struggles against this brain of neoliberalism, the World Bank, with all of its crony capitalist and eco-destructive tendencies, there may be some possibilities for resistance. And that was one of the things that in 2010 allowed us to generate this widespread critique led by the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance. And its leader this year, Desmond Tutu, won the Goldman Prize, the sort of Nobel Prize for environmental activists. An earlier leader, Bobby Peake, had won the same prize in 1998. And I think it's very important to go through to say, will a community-based social movement with NGO techie skills that are very high quality, I mean, they measure the air quality in South Durban, which is the largest oil refinery complex in Africa, and send them to get tested and try to make links between the high asthma and leukemia rates, and then protest at the oil companies. BP and Shell are the biggest. Exxon is trying to get permission to drill offshore the last few weeks. Again, a major campaign led by SETSI against it. And SETSI's been calling for financial sanctions. And we began this, I'm a lay member because I live there, against the World Bank. And it has rolled into the 350.org divestment strategy. I don't know if you comrades in Europe have picked this up, that you divest, you get your university pension fund, your municipality to not invest in fossil fuel companies. So the next stage of that is to move towards the facilitators of fossil fuels, especially Transnet. That brings us finally to what we think could be, if all the stars are aligned, the vanguard of a united front from within a trade union, which is called the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa. I sometimes am guilty of romanticism and even substitutionism, trying to say, well, this is going to be a trade union that takes forward a renewable energy mandate with climate change as a core argument, with municipal ownership, community control, labor, a worker-managed system. And yet that's actually what they have proposed. Their intellectual witness is Inga Sekweba, who's also the overall United Front coordinator. But they just hired somebody, some of you comrades may know Kolja Abramski. Does that ring a bell? Kolja is just being hired by NUMSA to work full-time on these projects of a transition, sparking an energy revolution. This is a major book of 70 chapters. We have one on Soweto. And to me, those are the sorts of histories and experiences with some partial victories, big losses, but ordinary people self-empowering through illegal reconnections, while a broader critique of the climate injustice is moving forward with finally a proletariat that isn't gazing upward, like German workers sometimes do, to the corporatist relationships, big business, big government, big labor. I don't mean SPD and the labor unions you know, Levi Metal has always inspired us. But I do mean that there's a new revolutionary opportunity with energy at the core, if these activists can take forward the potential. Thank you, comrades. Remember this slogan? Mandla! Awaited! If you're inspired by South Africa, come visit us, be in solidarity. Mandla! Awaited!
That a country with social extremes such as South Africa still has a lot of capacity for protesting. I think we should go deeper into that later, but before I would like to give the word to Jonathan to bring in his experience.
Okay, I'm going to speak from a backward country, Great Britain, and about our experiences and what we've been able to do. And I'm going to start with our campaign in Britain, and then at the end, I'm going to move on to the global energy revolution, of which we are trying to be one part. We have a campaign in Britain now that has been going for 5 years for 1 million climate jobs. By that, we do not mean green jobs, jobs that are useful, jobs that are environmental. We mean very specifically jobs that cut down the amount of carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere. And we mean new jobs, not jobs that are already there, but new jobs. And we need public sector jobs. We want the government to hire people, and we don't mean that we want 1 million jobs created in the next 10 years. We want the government to employ 90,000 people in January, 90,000 more in February, until at the end of the year we are employing 1 million people. This campaign has the support now. Our third edition of our plan is coming out. We have the support of 7 national trade unions, including from this year the main trade union for metal workers. We have the Campaign Against Climate Change, the main climate campaign, and we have the National Union of Students, which represents all the students.
This is about half of the trade union members in Britain. Now, in our plan, what we are proposing is 1 million jobs for 2 reasons. One of which is we have mass unemployment in Britain. And we have, depending on how you count it, between 2.5 and 5 million people who need a job, most of whom are desperate because they don't have a job. And so we want to get jobs for those people. But also, we want to stop climate change. We have a whole panel of experts and architects and everything, and we have done the mathematics in great detail. And we think that with 1 million workers, we can cut carbon dioxide emissions by 86% in 20 years. You cannot do that just by saving energy. And you cannot do it just by degrowth. We have to, if you think within 30 or 40 years, we have to cut carbon dioxide emissions in the United States and Australia by 98%, in Germany by 95%, in Europe by 90%, in South Africa by 90%, in China by 80%, in India by 60%. These are massive changes. We cannot make these changes by doing less of something. We have to do something entirely different. The way we worked it with our million jobs when we looked at all the different ways of doing it is, first, we save energy, 200,000 jobs for 20 years to convert all of the houses and insulate them so they use much less energy, all of the houses for free for everybody. Secondly, 300 jobs in public transport instead of cars. Some cars left, but most people on trains and buses. The third thing, 400,000 jobs in renewable energy, in wind power, solar, wave, tidal. So that within 20 years, we close down all the fossil fuels for electricity. All the electricity is made from renewables. All of the transport, except planes, all of the transport runs on electricity from renewables. All of the heating in houses is from electricity from renewables. And about half of the combustion of materials for industry is electricity from renewables. We still have a little bit, we still have about 14% of carbon dioxide emissions left, because the most difficult bits to tackle are burning materials in factories and airplanes. Those are the most, and agriculture. Those are the three difficult ones. But 86% cuts. Now, we can do this in Britain. We can do it in the world. With 1 million workers out of a workforce of 30 million in Britain, we can do it in 20 years. With 3% of the world's workforce on a global scale, we can do it in 20 years. With 6% of the world's workforce, we could do it in 10 years. Anybody who tells you we can't stop climate change, that there are technical barriers to stopping it, is wrong. There are no technical barriers. The barriers are corporate and political. The 10 largest corporations in the world by sales last year, 6 of the 10 were oil companies, 3 of them were car companies, 1 of them was Walmart, a giant parking lot. If you want to look at the problem in Britain, 2 of the 5 largest corporations in Britain are in the world, 2 of the 5 largest corporations in the world are oil corporations. If you want to look at the problem in Germany, the 2 largest corporations in Germany are car corporations. That is who stands in our way, but technically we don't have the problem. What I want to end with, though, is why it is so important that this comes from the unions and how we did it. Do I have 3 minutes? 2. I will explain later how we did it from the union. No, I'll explain later why it is politically important. But how we did it from the unions is very important. We did not start with an alliance of all the unions and all the NGOs in the room. We could not get the NGOs to start with, although we have many of them now, because we said it has to be public sector. We said it has to be public sector because we say to every coal miner, to every car worker, to every oil worker, we say if you lose your job, you will have a climate job with the government. We guarantee you the same job at the same rate of pay. And the NGOs at first would not go for that. Many of the unions, most centrally concerned, would not go for it at first. And we started with the unions without much relationship to it. The University Teachers Union, my union, the Postal Workers Union, the railway unions. Do you know what I mean? Unions not very much concerned. And then we worked our way by having a plan, by selling it, by campaigning. We worked our way to the situation last year. We're in the largest union in the country that organizes most of the metal workers. There was a vote at the national conference, and the delegates voted by a very large majority to support this plan against the wishes of the leaders of the union. That is how we did it. If you start with what everybody agrees with, they agree with nothing. The last thing is we're both very open and reformist and very extreme and revolutionary at the same time. And what we are open about, this will sound strange, what we are open and reformist about is social justice. We will have very large alliances. We say it has to be public sector because we have to be able to guarantee everybody a job, not because we're saying everything has to be nationalized. But what we're extreme about is climate change. We are extreme about that we will have to go all the way in the energy transformation. And that when we draw up plans, if some people are in danger of losing their jobs, we say, we will fight to give you another job. But we don't say, well, okay, it's all right to have some of those jobs. That's very important because by being principled about the climate, we draw in much larger numbers of people, including from the unions and the workplaces that are most affected. Because if you get up and tell the truth to people, they know you're telling the truth if you know you're telling the truth. If what you're saying about what you're going to do is completely honest, is not compromised, then they know you're not compromised and you're serious in what you're doing. I will come back in the discussion to talk about if we can win this, how this will change the relations of power in democracy in the whole society. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think this was quite provocative. I mean, we are talking about degrowth, and you're basically talking about new jobs, which also means that we have 1 million people using their salaries, maybe for air travel or for consumption. So let's see what we're going to do with that. And I want to do a short break here to see if there's any question of understanding, any comment right now before we go deeper into the discussion. Please.
Well, UK, what are those jobs about? Do they?
What?
What will those jobs be about? Will they go to your home and say you could save pictures in here?
Okay, should we collect more questions if there are any? Yes, there. The girl with the purple shirt. Okay, and third question, please.
I'm interested in the opportunities for developing countries, because if we are from somehow developed countries,
Not him.
technology.
Not him, he's just white.
Yeah, maybe I repeat the question. Your question was why there's not someone from a least developed country on the panel.
The question is not why, it's just what are the opportunities for developing countries regarding the energy revolution?
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah. Can you show up your hand so that I can see how many more questions there are? Okay, I think we can take 2 more and then we make a break. Lee, please.
Just a quick one. Why did you include agriculture as such a difficult area for carbon or emission reductions?
Okay, and there?
I have a question, especially to Friedrich, because you mentioned the, I think it's the co-pilot, and it's incredible that actually the World Bank financed it. Do you know if the KfW was involved in this too? See, that's a shame.
Yeah. Very good question. So for Jonathan, I think you should maybe address what kind of jobs will there be in your campaign, then a question on the less working hours.
Okay. What kind of jobs? Out of 400,000 jobs in renewable energy, about 200,000 are factory jobs. Making solar panel array, making the frames for solar panels, making turbines for wave and wind power, making wind turbines. Renewable energy jobs are very factory intensive. This is counterintuitive, because we think of them as environmental and therefore good and therefore somehow in the countryside. But that's, when you look at what the jobs are, that's not the case. And about half of them are about half of them are factory jobs in one way or another, and about half of them are maintenance jobs, more in offshore wind and in solar power than anything else. A lot of those jobs are also on ships, one way or another on the sea. They are seafaring jobs. These are in some ways quite traditional sorts of jobs. The jobs in transport, 10,000 people building cycle lanes, 120,000 people driving buses, 60,000 people fixing and cleaning and supporting the driving of buses, about 40,000 people driving engines, train engines, and about 80,000 people with other jobs on the railway. In converting of houses, the great majority of these jobs are different kinds of building trades. Painters, electricians, plumbers, and so on. All told, all across the board, these million jobs, the single most common one is electrician, which surfaces in all of them. The reason that these jobs are like that is that the problem of climate change, it's a political problem in 1,000 different ways, but it's also a physical problem. It's a physical problem of the emissions of carbon dioxide, and it's a physical problem caused by the labor of men and women. And so it needs to be solved by the labor of men and women. We don't say that we're not going to go to people's houses and say, do you know, this, it would be good if you did this. We're going to do it for free for everybody. We're going to renew everybody's house for everybody for free. You can refuse, but very, very few people would refuse. So those are the kinds of jobs. And I was very surprised when we started to look into them in detail. I was very surprised how many of them are industrial and factory jobs. It's very surprising, but there it is. What about degrowth? We're running a coalition here, and it is a very broad coalition. And we have people in climate change. You learn that people come into climate change work always with their own thing. So the vegetarians say we have to change our diet. And the environmentalists say it has to be local. And the Marxists say we have to have a revolution. And so on and so on and so on. Each person, the degrowth people says it has to be degrowth. Each person has their thing. And we tried to start without assuming that we were going to go with anybody's particular thing, but we were going to do a coalition of everybody for what we would do about climate change. However, I think at the core of the problem of growth is the nature of the economic system. It's the nature of profits. It is, in Karl Marx's phrase about capitalism, accumulation, accumulation, accumulation is their Moses and their prophets. And that is why the system is endlessly driven to growth. It's not in our inherent nature, it's not in us as consumers, it's because the profits must always increase. If the only way to break that is, I think, to end the capitalist system and replace it with something better. What would be better is a long argument, which is happening all over the world now. But it seems to me that the core to being able to have an alternative is to have a large enough group of people who will fight for an alternative. We cannot build a movement in Britain or South Africa or Mozambique or Brazil that starts by saying to people that people hear us saying, you will have less. And so what I'm saying here is it's still probably even true in Germany that half of the people in this room know somebody you love who does not have a job and wants a job. We are doing it for those people because that way we can mobilize enough people to stop climate change. If we can mobilize enough people to stop climate change, we have also changed the world. We have changed the relations of power in the world between the people who work and between the 99% and the 1%. We have changed those relations of power. We have said we can change the whole energy system in order to save all the living things. And if we can do that, after that, everything else gets easier.
So maybe one last sentence, Jonathan, on the reduction of working hours. And please be very brief because we have many comments. I'm absolutely in favor of the reduction of working hours. On a general level, since my child was born in 1978, I have never worked full time. And I'm poor, but I'm happy. And I think that is for the good of everybody. But I think if you go to working class people and you say, we are going to take away the full-time job, they think that you are the people who are bringing them austerity. So I think we have to learn to trust each other in shared struggle, and then together we fight for shorter hours.
That same class analytic, solidaristic sentiment works north-south. So even I live in the global north, in Durban, South Africa, as a petit bourgeois academic. But what I found in those struggles is that by invoking redistributive processes, along with that Naomi Klein slogan we heard, this changes everything, the degrowth strategy for the profit centers is consistent with environmental justice in the South. Much of our discussion the last few days has sought to find processes that will justify redistributive and transformative aspects, including energy. Clean energy in everyone's house must be, if you like the language, a human right, or it must be the source of so much struggle, because in so many African countries, like South Africa, the consumer of electricity is the extractive industries. And in South Africa, the number one consumer, BHP Billiton, uses 11% of the country's electricity, which it gets for that 1 US cent per kilowatt hour. Just appalling. And that means, yes, when KfW not just supports this broader coal-based strategy, but explicitly defends it and profits from it. In 2008, a 250 million euro loan that KfW did independently. And in 2009, it was a lead bank for a 530 million euro loan, itself giving 81.5 million. Just so we know why, your money, if you're Germans, let's look at their press release. Frankfurt, 22 May 2009, KfW, IPEX Bank, finances highly energy efficient Medupi coal-fired power station. Medupi was said to be supercritical air-cooled, which it isn't, said to innovate with carbon capture and storage, another false solution, which is too expensive, it's not doing it, and was meant to have lower emissions, but is now asking for exemptions from emission standards. So why? Why does KfW finance? What is it that your money goes to? Here's just one sentence. As coordination bank, KfW, IPEX Bank, together with 6 other banks, is financing the boilers for the 4,800 megawatt, that's the 4th biggest in the world, coal-fired power station in South Africa. The boilers will be supplied by the German plant manufacturer Hitachi Power Europe. That's a very traditional German name, Hitachi. Formerly Babcock Borsig, domiciled in Duisburg, and its local partner Hitachi Africa. The financing supports German exports as well as local industry. Blah, blah, blah. So we have a sense of an extraordinary, like KfW always aid and profits for German corporates. And that means the need we have to declare on the huge foreign debt, now 140 billion, odious components. And Medupi was meant to be in place for the 2010 World Cup. That was part of the KfW advertisement. We'll make it quick. Let them enjoy what we did in Germany. World Cup, yes. And in fact, that power plant is still under construction. It may start in December, but more likely next March, because of lots and lots of conflicts, misplanning, corruption, including our ruling party, which is the 1/4 owner of Hitachi Africa. The African National Congress is getting a bonsala from this. And they actually rejigged the tender to allow that to happen. So it just gets back to the first question, can we get any energy justice under systems of centralized coal-fired power plants with a crony capitalist financing relationship that reaches deep into your pockets? I think we can if we allow these activists to more systematically generalize their struggles with the united front of communities reconnecting their electricity illegally, environmentalists telling us why we must move off of coal, and the trade union, the biggest trade union in Africa, the metal workers, saying this must be restructured in a just transition for NUMSA members of ESCOM to have some decent jobs for a change. I think that's the formula we're seeking. Watch us, help us in the next period, thanks, comrades, because your money is helping the other team.
Okay, I want to make some comments, maybe. First, energy. I think we should not think energy for domestic use. It's not, at least from a southern perspective, is not what is in question. The greatest majority of energy in Brazil is over 80% is for extractive industry and for irrigation. So we are not talking about what we need to leave. It's what they need to extract at the cheapest price and to embody in the commodity to be competitive. So we export aluminium, but we export energy. That energy that is much more component in the price of the aluminium. We export iron ore more and more instead of iron, the mineral, because to make the pig iron, the little roll or the bunky thing, you need to burn that with coal, with from the woods, and then you have some condensed energy form that is cheaper to produce steel. Now, a ThyssenKrupp installed in Brazil in this sense. And why do we make why we have to submit to this energy logic? Because we have to export more and more because we have to pay the external debt. So there is this vicious cycle that we have to have in mind when we discuss energy. And in this sense, I have some different vision from the UK, because we are having land grabs, we are destroying ecosystems in Brazil to export wood pellets to the UK. The largest part of the renewable energy policy in UK is biomass dependent, and a biomass that is not produced within UK, Scotland, or Ireland. It's coming from the south. I have also studied that there are big plans for the UK, the third industrial revolution, based in intellectual property rights in the financial services from the City of London, because as far as I know, the largest part of the Great Britain GDP is exporting financial services, not soy or cattle beef or iron ore in Brazil. But I comment on LDCs, First, we are talking about not energy, commercial energy, energy as a commodity. This is what is at stake. So this is what they say, that there is a giant untapped market in the south. In India alone, they estimate 400 million people without access to modern forms of energy. And there are two ideological things in there. First, least developed country. I don't have time here, but I'm sure you are aware that the entire development is ideological. We are comparing countries and cultures, saying, no, you developed, you are finished, you are perfected, and we are developing to become as you. I mean, please, no? Some are underdeveloped, which is worse, so not talk about that. But let's refer to something very concrete, the ones following climate negotiation. The Kyoto will have a second commitment period. This was agreed in Durban, no? But because they are discussing the rules and how it's going to fit, the European Union, which has as its largest public policy for climate change, the EU emission trading schemes, committed to buy emission credits, the carbon credits from LDCs, least developed countries. So European Union is not buying right now. It's not possible within the system. Actually, you are collapsing, but that's okay. Buying credits from dams, landfills in China, India, or Brazil, which are the largest providers for the CDM, for the Clean Development Mechanism. So what is possible to buy now is something called POAs, Program of Activities, because such least developed countries are so small and are so rural that they had to come out with something, to sell. And I'm going to give you an example of this, that are the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, So they go after women in the countryside that, they burn wood, they burn cow's shit. In India, they have piles of cow's shit, and they have, it's a flat disc, and then you have this little clay stove where you burn that. It's completely agroecological, and you prepare a meal. And then you have anthropologists. You have all the scientific discourse that says, that woman is sick. No, we have to modernize. She needs access to clean energy, to modern energy. So what I have seen, a project, Bosch, Bosch, German company, takes to the women this Bosch intellectual property right stove that runs on jatropha, which is a biofuel. Then the women sign a contract that they will help at the plantation, they will use the biofuel to fuel, and they will sign that they will not go to the forest to harvest wood, because of course we need to halt deforestation. Can you see the cycle? So you set that wood, that forest for a carbon project, you install the biofuel, you sell intellectual property rights, and you genderfy, because now it's very in fashion, and because you are targeting women, you can have indicators that says that you are freeing time of women so they can develop their skills, they can study, maybe they develop. But this is also an asset, because it's possible today, and I can give you all the reference to work with W+, is a new form of a financial thing that they are developing, that is gender as a stand-alone assets. Because there is big demand in the developing projects market for targeting women. So this is, I don't know if it gets clear for you, or how this can be perverse. How you can put a lot of things that can look nice separately, but when you throw this in the system as we live, they can just fill the machine that will keep people considered lower than the others, that will build a discourse that judges different cultures. I'm not here defending everybody should cook with wood or with cow's shit, because it depends. But I have been in the Philippines, and people cook with coconut shell, and you have all the coconuts, you drink coconut, you just break the coconut, you dry, and you burn that, and you prepare your meal. You cannot burn coconut shells to produce aluminum to export to foreign markets. So this is the difference, What is the clean energy for what and for whom? This should be a mantra.
Good.
Thank you, Camila. More impressive examples for false solutions. More comments. I think you were the first one. Thank you. Someone else over there? Yes, you.
Camila, I want to address you. So you were, I think, sort of ridiculing this global alliance for clean cook stoves. I think this is a wrong approach, because I really, really think that, this might sound arrogant, but this dirty cooking, or cooking direct, or in-house cooking with wood, can lead, like Patrick Bond, you said it, leads to a spiritual
So thanks for this comment, but I think we take another one over there. There was someone. No. Yeah, please.
One question regarding that we have two people from the labor movement on the stage, first Susan and okay. And I think it's probably we should sketch a very global fact that if we are in favor of 100% renewable transition, as Netzer said, we not only have to fight capital, but we also have to fight labor, unfortunately. We always fight against labor unions defending jobs in all the dirty industries there, like coal, fracking, Inhalt. Okay, we all know the problem. So my question is, what is the next best, the closest solution you have which you could offer to people working in, let's say, coal and nuclear, when they're saying, okay, we need to shut down your factories, I mean, there should be something better than saying we offer you unemployment.
Okay, even though everyone is already excited to answer, I would take 2 or 3 more comments, please.
You talked about the there's one aspect of the energy revolution, a depressing aspect I think that wasn't taken up, and it has a link with the bridges you're trying to build with the labor movement. It's the revolution we have in the north as we try to dig out, extract, frack the last remnants of hydrocarbons that exist. I come from Canada, a country which is in there up to there, and it's probably going to tip the world's climate over the 2 degree because of the oil sands. And we see the types of struggles that are emerging out of this. It creates struggles around dispossession because, and the way also that these corporations in the new hydrocarbons, in the extreme oil, capture also the energy transition. Paradoxically, the biggest producer of wind and solar power in Canada is Enbridge. Enbridge is the biggest pipeline operator in North America and is the one that's pumping out the oil sands. So they capture Enbridge that buys the wind turbines from Germany, from Siemens. So they're working hard to capture the transition policies that are being put in place. Now, when you're trying, as a movement, to build bridges with the labor movement, well, what you're always meeting is this employment question. They're saying, yeah, okay, if we join your struggle against the tar sands, what are we going to tell our comrades operating the trucks, operating them? So I think it's an important strategic question we have to face. You are not seeing it yet in Germany because you decided not to go into fracking. I doubt you'll be able to hold on for a little while, for a long time. I think that fracking is going to become a major issue here, as it's going to come in Spain in the next 2 years. Spain is going to fracking big time in England, I think. So these questions are going to come up here, and it's going to create an immense pressure on our movements as we face what we call in Canada extreme oil, which with all the new struggles that are going to, and we're going to have to build bridges with the old labor unions around these struggles. So it's really an important question. And I just want to say one small comment, one last thing. And I'm happy to hear the word union, worker, and corporation instead of the word that I've been hearing in other panels by economists, by orthodox economists, because I'm an economist too, but of another type, which are markets, preferences, agents, and stuff like that. So thank you for using real economic words.
Thank you for this. There are 2 more comments. Laura?
I was just gonna ask Jonathan, like, if I got you right, half of the trade unions in the UK are supporting the Climate Jobs campaign, and I was just wondering whether there's any chance that the government's actually gonna take those ideas up, or any party that would be interested in cooperation, like taking at least some of those ideas into account, because like, I mean, from a German perspective, that sounds all quite amazing already, because it means it doesn't fighting the trade unions basically because they're very much in favor of coal. And yeah, maybe if you could also say a couple of words about how you were able to convince, or what your strategy was to convince the trade unions to abandon their support for coal.
So please, over there.
My question would be if in different continents or countries, how people, or let's say how maybe the NGO sector and also the politics perceive and are aware of their German energy limits, and if there's also, because I as a German right now, I see this
Okay, thank you. So the last comment would be like, how is the German energy transition perceived in other countries, and also the failures we have at the moment with increasing emissions coming from additional coal? Maybe we start with Camila this time.
First, I used the wrong term. It's cow's manure. No, sorry, I couldn't. So, of course, I used a very provocative and strong approach, just kind of you to react as you did. I'm glad, because the kind of generalization that we in the South suffer is this idea that it's all bad and we have the solution and we'll take you out of this condition. But what you describe, I spend a lot of time also in the countryside throughout Latin America, and depends on which eyes do you look to. Because it's not that all the women are cooking in this closed venue, breathing this bad air and because this is a description that also comes from an imagination. Because I've been and gathering wood very close by. It depends on how is the setting. So I don't think we can also generalize that all the women have to spend half of the day caring and the children, because this is kind of, they are all, we need to help them, we need to save them, we need to transform them. And maybe they are living in a different way than us, but they are autonomous on this. We are sitting here, but we are receiving gas that passed through Ukraine and is sold by Putin to European Union. So you have uranium-powered stations here that depends on mining where? In the north of India, in Brazil, elsewhere. So I think if we really want, we fuel our cars here, in your cars, no, not mine, I don't have one, in Europe, mostly, I believe, with oil that comes from Middle East. No, so I don't think we should be hypocrite in the sense, the women with the wood. This is one point. Then, I'm sorry, I think I lost you. The second thing you mentioned about. Okay, so I'm sorry, but I think it's something that really deserves a debate when you see how we judge and how we frame those things and how those projects actually develop on the ground and the colonialistic approach that is behind that. And if you're really talking about degrowth, if we are seriously challenging the society, this urbanized, oil-fueled society that we live, that depends on war to extract this oil, we have to think that the cities, as we have built them, are unsustainable. We will have to address a disurbanization movement, because we have to take back the lands. We have to restore ecosystems that have been completely transformed in monocultures. So a lot of people will have, yes, to live in the countryside. If we are talking about building more localized forms of energy, maybe cow's manure is not something ancient and behind. Maybe it's a way to have animals, not to kill them in factories and eat in concentration camps like facilities, but to use them as something that is part of an agroecological approach or a permaculture approach to how we are going to insert us as human among other species, without prejudices, without views of what is modern and what's backwardness.
I think I'd like to pick up, because this changes everything, means cities and energy and agriculture and transport and production, consumption, financing, disposal, everything. The problem is we have to go where movements have taken us and work within a certain logic in which development for so many includes turning on the switch and electricity comes out. And what we've found in this period with the class struggle over power and its price is that as the price goes up, as economists would say, the price elasticity makes, for poor people, electricity a luxury good. For the petty bourgeoisie, okay, I pay 180% price increase, but for the poor, it means that women are doing the energy switchback from turning on the electricity to fire a hot plate, a geyser, a hot water heater, a kettle, and now having to find ways to keep heating and cooking with dirty energy in a city where these possibilities of a more natural ecosystem energy aren't in existence. The solution has been to demand and partially win free basic electricity. Unfortunately, the struggle from below isn't yet strong enough to win more than tokenistic free. So there's a right to electricity, and the amount, if you are gurus of your electricity bill, is only 50 kilowatt hours per household per month. So 3 days later, now you go back to a very high-priced electricity. And that brings us to finally the question about the comrade in the green shirt asking labor community struggles that potentially could overcome this with an environmental consciousness. The critical thing for NUMSA, the National Union of Metal Workers, please go to their website, numsa.org.za, and you'll see that it was an ideological jump that this changes everything created when they went to a climate conference at Cornell University. Laura Skinner was originally on this panel, and it was her Cornell Labor Institute that invited NUMSA leaders. As they prepared and learned about climate, and as we also hosted the COP17 Conference of Polluters, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Conference at the Party 17, Durban hosted the Conference of Polluters. Lots of street struggles, 10,000 people protesting. Labor NUMSA was in attendance. It's that ideological jump that I feel we are not just war of position, petty bourgeois radical academics, but a war of movement. And it's also in Parliament with the economic freedom fighters. They were in testimony in Parliament on Saturday last week, which was held in Durban, around climate because of the big debate in New York on September 23rd, the heads of state. And now a new left in our parliament, very vibrant, cheeky, saying this is pandering to big business that needs to emit more. And a final point that gets us ideologically moving is the allegation that the left in South Africa is making about the new source of financing for dirty energy, the BRICS new development bank that was announced in Fortaleza in middle of July. The BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, an emerging bloc. Anti-imperialist, sub-imperialist. Is that okay? Mauro Morini came up with that word. We'll debate that later. Okay, but the point is that that's the next problem. Once we defeat the World Bank, KfW, well, they'll turn to a BRICS bank. And it's at that level where the biggest energy projects in South Africa, a third big coal-fired power plant, and then a mega hydro dam, a hydropower project called Inga, which is 3 times bigger than the Three Gorges. 3 times bigger. It's 42,000 megawatts in the middle of the Congo River to take electricity to Italy and Cape Town, if they can protect the transmission lines, built by the Chinese corporations that built the Three Gorges Dam so badly. Those are the sort of political struggles that mean ideologically we're bringing this question of climate and energy into a broader context. We need your support.
Is this the last time around?
No.
Okay.
You still
so I
have
don't
a
have
final
to
statement.
answer everything. Okay. I want to start with women in villages in the global south. I haven't lived in that many countries, but I lived in 2 villages in Afghanistan for 12 months. And I lived in a village on the border between Nepal and Tibet for 6 months. And I lived in an indigenous village in Venezuela for 3 months. And I visited a lot of many villages in India in my life. And in all of those cases, it's not true that women are working harder at domestic work than they are in Germany. Women in Germany and Britain work harder at domestic work than people do in those villages. People in the cities, women in the cities in those countries, work very hard at domestic work. Because what happens what Patrick's point, when you move to the city, if you're in an indigenous village in Venezuela, the adults and the children all go to the field. In Afghanistan, the majority of women in the countryside in Afghanistan, 95% of women in the countryside in Afghanistan, have always worked in the fields. Childcare is much more shared in these countries because people like children. They don't like children in Europe, but in those countries they like children. And men like children much more in those countries than they do here. So you have to be very, very careful because we have developed an ideology that says it is all right for the rich countries of the global north to control the oil because those people are sexist. In Afghanistan and Iraq, they're sexist. So what will we do? We will bomb and kill the women and children in those countries. And we will do it because we're feminists. I'm not saying for one moment that there isn't a great deal of oppression there. But what I'm saying, for instance, I work in a university part-time in Britain. I've been part of a growing campaign there and in the United States against rape in the universities and against sexual harassment of students and against sexual harassment of people who work in the universities. I think this is where we stand and fight, where we are, rather than assuming that we're so much better than other people. Well, then, I think maybe you misunderstood me, Camila, because my attitude towards the British government and British economic policy is that everywhere I've lived in my life, the government is my enemy. And the government of your own country is your most important enemy. And we do not, in Britain, in our campaign, we do not have any biofuels at all. We said no. Renewable energy, no biofuels. Pellets. No pellets, none of it. It's not one bit of our plan involves that. Because we said as soon as you do that, as soon as you start to go with biomass, as soon as you start to go with biofuels, there are three possible uses. There are the energy uses of the biofuels, there are the food uses of the biofuels for the hungry people, and there is replanting the forest to refix the carbon. And so we don't want it used for energy purposes. Again, my attitude towards intellectual property rights, I'm against intellectual property rights. I'm a writer, so that's a bit difficult for me. But in every other form, steal it. I mean, that's what we're going to have to do. It's what they did with the AIDS drugs in South Africa. The way that the treatment action campaign saved the lives of millions and millions of people was to steal the intellectual property rights. That's what we have to do. And the treatment action campaign proves you can do it. The point about development, no, I won't. The German transition, be very careful. Always be very careful of the arrogance of your own rulers. The German energy transition is there. But the odd thing about it is that German emissions are very much in line with the emissions of all of the other countries in Europe. And although Camila is completely right about Brazil, about where the emissions are coming from in the extractive industry, the majority of emissions in Germany are coming from transport and the heating of houses. And the transition has stopped at the point where it is nowhere near 100%. This brings me back to the very important point about air travel. What about more air travel? What about more consumption? What about what's called the Jevons paradox, which many of you will know about? If you are going to say we are going to go 50% renewable, then you always have the problem of increased carbon fuels, increased renewable fuels endlessly. We're saying we're going to go 100% renewable. And what we do with people who sell coal is we put them in jail for 5 years, the same way you would with any other poison. It's illegal. You make non-renewable energy illegal. And if it's illegal, you don't have a problem with the Jevons paradox. You do still have a problem. You don't have the problem with climate. You still have the problem with all the other resources. You still have the coal, the steel, all the other things that go into it. You still have that as a problem with the Jevons paradox, but you don't have it with the energy itself. And the same with in our plan for air travel. As a first step, we're going to cut the amount of air travel in half, and then we're going to cut the amount of emissions from that in half. So we've cut it by 3/4. And then we go on to cut the rest. And people will have to take trains. And people will have to, in the end, they'll have to go through the Aleutian Islands, I think, when I want to go visit my family who are back in the United States. Yeah.
Can I have a small comment to that?
Yeah.
I would very
Please.
much challenge
No.
And I mean, having electricity, all these commodities we enjoy, I guess this is not really feasible from a technical point of view. You have to make steel, but you get the steel maybe then from outsourced industries in China that use big coal power plants.
No.
How would you produce the steel?
Okay, I've been talking about it as if Britain was one country. This only works if the whole world does it. Because we need to stop climate change. We will not stop climate change unless there is a reduction in the emissions in India and in China and so on. And that will not happen unless the workers and the small farmers of India and China want it to happen. Whatever coalition we have has to include those people. Those people want electricity. There's no doubt. You ask them what they want electricity, they want a school, they want a hospital. That's what they want. Any village meeting you go to. Technically, it's perfectly possible to do it renewably. It requires more work. It's more expensive because coal and gas are cheaper. They're cheaper because they take, at the moment, less human labor. It's possible to hypothesize a future in which the price of wind and solar has come down and so on, and we may get there, and we may not, because the price of coal and gas is also going down. So it requires more labor, more work to do it. Because it requires more work, it is the people who run our world don't want to do it. Because that work is jobs for us, and it's an expense for profits. So it's more of what we need, and their interests suffer. No, electric arc. Electric arc technology to make steel. I mean, it's one of the easier ones. There are harder ones like cement, but steel and aluminium. But steel is more straightforward. Electric arc technology will do it. It would need an enormous number of wind turbines, yes. Enormous. That's why we say 1 million jobs. Globally, I think 120 million jobs.
I think maybe in general we have to be aware that there are two different strategies towards an energy transformation, and one would be a decarbonized growth strategy, which means we use the same amount of energy but based on renewables, and the other one would be another strategy. We don't have a name for that now, but it would be like climate or energy justice, and so that means we also change the system. We use less energy, but it also means that we have to have a societal change. We need to reduce working hours, for example. We need to change the economic structures of our system. Of course, it's a more complicated approach because we don't have a model yet, and it's a much more broad change than just greening the existing system. And of course, these are ideal cases, and probably in reality we will have a mixture of different approaches, but I think this comes out from discussion very clearly that it's a fight of or between different ideologies actually. But I saw more comments. You were first, but I think you have a direct reaction.
Just on that question, in French we say that energy descent, that's the position. In Quebec, where I come from, 50% of our energy is renewable hydroelectricity and 50% is oil. And there's the debate right now in the Green Left is between the people that say we replace the 50% with more renewables, or my position, which is the energy descent, but it comes from Latouche and those people. The expression is the descent. So you go down, you say 50% is what we can generate right now. Well, that's where we have to go down to, and we have to downshift the whole economy to be able to adapt at that level. And I think that's where the debate is. I'm sorry, I just wanted. So the word we use is energy descent, and I think it can be done by becoming happier, losing less junk, and wasting less. But anyway.
Thank you. No, please.
Talking about energy transformation and transition or Energiewende in Germany, it's quite interesting to see here the relevance of the crisis. So let's talk about the crisis. Because you're talking about having a decent life, having a job, having what else. And so we are talking about money, and the money has to come from somewhere. And
your question still there? Or? Yep.
We also have to talk about the subsidies. Thank you.
Okay, here, over here, please. Yeah.
I just wanted to say to your comment, I totally agree with you from a European point of view, but what Jonathan said that, I mean, China and India, they are more hungry than ever for energy. They want cheap energy now, and it's coal. And maybe we have to, like because it's also our problem, because emissions from stop the border. And I mean, we have to offer them technology to make their development greener, because they will not, I don't think they will accept that they that because this will start, I mean, it's starting right now in Sweden.
Thank you. Now the gentleman in the gray shirt.
So first of all, like I study renewable energy, or I study, and you said that 100% renewable energy is feasible, is technically possible, technologically possible. But actually, after studying it, I found out that it's actually not so easy, because you need all those storage technologies. You need, if you want to reduce storage, you actually need to produce much more energy, much more renewable energy. It could be. I mean, so you actually, to reduce storage, you can go to 100% renewable energy electricity production, and then you're actually at 100%, or then you're maybe like carbon free or something like that. Okay, so first, just this. But then 100%, I mean, the coal problem is not the only, like the CO2 problem is not the only problem. So thanks for you. Because we're rushing towards all those peaks, you know, we're rushing towards not only peak oil, we're rushing towards peak soil, peak steel for wind turbines, we're rushing towards peak rare earth for magnets for wind turbines, we're rushing towards thousands of peaks and resources, and this problem we cannot solve with 100% renewable energy. This problem we can solve with degrowth, and this is actually why degrowth is existing. So, and then one more thing. So one strategy of degrowth is, like we have, for example, we have to reduce our carbon emissions in the West, in the developed world. Sorry to say this. And we have to converge together with the global south to a somehow sustainable level of CO2 emissions, right? So they're able to use electricities to have some more comfort in their lives. Let's say like this. So I think that you need a massive redistribution from the north to the south. I mean, this is just a thing of global justice. So let me not, I don't want to call it development work or something like this. I want to call it redistribution.
Oh, very nice.
And I think one part of redistribution could be fish and cook stoves also.
Thank you. I saw 3 more comments. Maybe girl in the last row.
Yeah, I was wondering about the solidarity aspect, because I'm missing a bit the fact that for example, the German energy transition. I mean, it's all based on new technology, which is again based on materials that come from the global south that are extracted in an unacceptable way. So how can we build up solidarity with the workers in the global south while having this energy transition to a more sustainable energy production?
Who else was there? Yes, please.
How do you see the role of nuclear energy in the future? Because I know like Bill Gates is campaigning for nuclear energy. Of course, yeah. In France they still have 58 power plants, and it's still not like we still have enough uranium. Yeah, it would be the easiest way. So if you look at the car production, I think many car producers they
Thank you. And the last comment was the gentleman in the green shirt.
Yeah, just I was tempted to ask how is the energy transition going to cure cancer? Just a joke, because I think there's like a long list of wishes here, and then you're supposed to answer all that. And we have to see one thing: this energy transition is happening. It's kind of a really existing capitalism, right? It's pretty one of the few pretty good things happening in that. And then I would say many of the wishes which have been voiced here, there's only one answer. You're not going to fulfill that in capitalism. There is no solidaric trade in that system. So you cannot blame it on the technology, you cannot blame it on renewable energy. It's not the fault of a wind turbine that the system is not just okay. So I think we have to see these two things, not make artificial division, because there's also exists, as you said, there's the division between the system change fraction and that's only the energy transition fraction. There's a third fraction, which I was happy enough to listen to at University, who are finding all the arguments what is bad about renewable energy, all the little things which you can find if you want. But then at the end of the day, that means nuclear is just keeping on running, coal is just keeping on running, you do nothing. I think, I mean, just flash for us all to make this difference. System change, behavior on Camila's side and global revolution, and change we can have inside of the system, and not like spoil the one with the arguments for the other. I think that's just a flash, not to like put water in the wine of beautiful things we have. Why not dismissing revolution again?
Thank you very much. Time is running, so if there are no more comments and questions urgently, I would ask the panelists to react on what they heard. And yeah, maybe also tell us your final statement. What kind of alliance or next steps can you imagine to address an energy transformation? Jonathan, you want to start?
Sure. So many things. I'll take you after the meeting through the detail of how we pay for it. But basically, a combination of the government makes much more money when people go to work because they pay taxes and they stop claiming benefits. In Germany, the government gets about 90% back if they hire somebody into the public sector. So partly that, but partly we have to break the idea that they cannot do deficit financing. We have to stop believing in their economics, which says we can't do this. What we're talking about with an energy transition is something, the only thing before on the scale is World War II. In World War II, every major power in the world with utterly different economic systems all oriented their economic system to make as many weapons as possible, as fast as possible, to kill as many people as possible in order to win. That did not leave everybody in terrible debt and the world economy in chaos. It ended the Great Depression. What we need to do is to do that, but not in order to kill people, in order to save lives. We need to just get away from that kind of economics. The nuclear power, no. I don't want it for all the reasons everybody else doesn't want it. Nobody wants it near their house. And all they need is one more Fukushima and nobody will have it. It's going. It's also a very expensive. It's compared to the argument about is it technologically possible, it's an enormous debate. I've been reading, I spent most of the last 7 years reading on it. Seems to me the argument is it's technologically possible. You need very large grids covering many countries. You need a lot of headroom. There's an enormous amount of technical stuff about what you need, but it's certainly doable. What I want to end with, though, is solidarity and system change. Because it is utopian to think that we can simply change the kind of energy we use to renewable energy without changing an enormous amount else about the system. On one level, it's a technological change, But on another level, there are really existing corporations. Shell and Exxon and BP and Daimler and Volkswagen, these are real corporations. These corporations are the most, Eskom, these are the most powerful corporations in the world. If in order to do this, it is for corporate life or death. They know that if we go over to renewable energy, they lose every penny they have. That's why we say to their workers, we will guarantee you a job. But we do not say it to the owners. We can't say both, and this is why it's a struggle. And energy goes into every single bit of our lives. We can't simply do it by a descent, because we're not talking about 50%, we're talking about 95%. A 95% cut would mean that here, we're outside, we're not here, because there are no universities. You did have some food this morning, you had some rice or bread this morning, and you will again this evening, but you have no clothes. And you walked here, and I'm not here because I'm dead, because there are no hospitals. We're talking about if we just handle it with a cut in standard of living, it's impossible. We don't want that, and nobody wants that. We have to have a combination of energy saving, but changing the kind of energy we use. That change is a struggle. This brings me to the last thing about solidarity. I think of solidarity in two places. I did research for a while in New Orleans, which is near where I grew up in the United States. New Orleans is the first place, really, to be lost on a large scale to climate change. One half of the people who live in New Orleans went after Hurricane Katrina, and they haven't come back because they're not rebuilding the dams, the levees, to protect the city from the next hurricane. 150,000 people gone. The pain of that betrayal and the pain of the death and so on is enormous for the people in New Orleans, in a very rich country. And the pain of the military occupation they suffered with men shoving machine guns in their face for months and months afterwards. Where Patrick lives in Durban, I was there for the COP, and I've been there another time, the cyclones are working their way towards Durban with global warming as they go further and further down the coast. Durban, there is this enormous valley at sea level, which is the greatest concentration of oil refineries and chemical plants I have ever seen, in the middle of an enormous bunch of working class housing. When the cyclone finally hits, and the wave hits, the tsunami that comes with a cyclone or a hurricane, which the one that hit New Orleans was 9 meters high when it hit the coast. If a 9-meter high wall of water comes up there, all of that is going to explode. All of those refineries, all of those chemical plants, that will be, it will be poisoned and death. The solidarity is that we stop that happening. The solidarity is that we fight in every country so that that does not happen to New Orleans or to Durban or to Shanghai or to the Mekong Delta. Or Hamburg. And that, it seems to me, is the concrete solidarity, and it involves fighting against the people who run our countries in both places. I know that sounds like a revolution, and in one sense it is a revolution, and this is where I want to stop. I don't want to say, though, we have to make a revolution in order to do this, because I think when you say that to people, what most people believe is that's not possible. And when you say we have to make a revolution, most people think, well, then it's not going to happen. Then I'll go hide again. I think what we say to people is the anti-apartheid movement, the anti-colonial movement, the movement that built the welfare state in this country and across Europe, when people set out to do those things, many people said it was impossible. And it certainly took very close to a revolution to do those things. Maybe what we want to do with the energy system, maybe we need a classic revolution. Maybe we can get there without it if we build a big enough movement with each other. But I think the first step is to decide to build the movement with each other and move outwards. The environmental movement at the moment, I've been an environmentalist a long time now, and we're in a ghetto. We're in a very big ghetto. It's a big enough ghetto to save the whales. Not most species, but to save the whales. It's not a big enough ghetto to solve the problem of climate change. To solve that problem, we're going to need the majority of people in the world. And we're going to have to move out beyond what is now a movement that is largely in the global north, that is largely white, that is largely among the more affluent people, white people in the global north. We're going to have to move out. And one of the reasons for the 1 million climate jobs is so that we can get far beyond the limits of the movement we're in now. And we've done it in Britain, and boy, are we backward. They've done it in South Africa, where they are very advanced. It must be possible everywhere.
Okay. Nuclear. No. Thanks. No future. We all know that civil use of nuclear energy is the way to subsidize the military use of nuclear. No? And then when you say, we still have uranium, still have mines, is there any uranium mine in Germany that I'm not aware? Oh, okay. It's your overseas territories. Oh, I forgot. Second, watch out. When you say, oh, China and India are hungry for energy. My God. Who is hungry? I know people in China and in India that are hungry, but for food, And the energy, it's energy for what and for whom? Maybe it's energy to embody in the commodities that you buy here so you don't have to account for the emissions in Europe. No, so you have to look at embodied energy. So I go back to what I mentioned at the beginning in my long story. Are we going to strive for a biomass-based capitalism? Do we want 100% renewable energy-fueled capitalism? It's not about just what you feed into the system. I referred at the beginning, we have an oil-based civilization. And if we don't take the challenge of energy as a civilizational challenge, we're still into the reformist and the technological discourse. As we speak, the very same companies that run the oil military complex in the world are engaged in the renewable energy for all initiative that tries, sidelining the United Nations, to put forward this great energy revolution. Because as I also mentioned here, they see India as 400 million people that are not yet into modern electricity or modern energy. They are consumers. 400 million consumers of energy that can start to pay for energy. We have said here also that energy is a right. Yes, but energy is a right for our living, not for the living in capitalism, extracting, transforming, and moving things around. So I quoted Energy for What and for Whom, which is the motto of the dams affected people's movement in Brazil. So hydroelectricity is not neutral. Even the small one, you have to occupy territory, you destroy biodiversity, you take land. We have wind farms that have evicted people all over Latin America, in Mexico, and north of Brazil, I think the most famous cases. Solar energy also depends on mining of silicium. And you know how high the prices of the silicium are because of Germany, that does not have that many sun, has solar panels all over. In Brazil, it's completely unviable to buy a solar panel because it's too for the rich. It's for the rich boho green that want to show that they are very correct, so they can pay a super fine architect to design a greenhouse. And then you start to distinguish people. So the real change is a radical change in our lifestyle. We cannot change energy, and we cannot challenge the oil-based civilization that built modernity without challenging the other side. Modernity had a colonial ballast. You could only have the emergence of modernity in Europe and drink coffee because you had coffee plantations elsewhere, and you have slave trade sustaining it, the material basis of that. So when my colleague here says people want schools, people want hospitals, I don't think so. I think people want learning, not schools. I'm with Ivan Illich. We should de-school the world. We have the right to learn continuously all our lives, everything that humanity has created. But this does not translate itself in an institution, a Prussian institution, or origin, that obliges you to behave and to discipline and to accept a system that you want to revolt. We don't want hospitals. I don't want hospitals. I want health. And health depends on having a healthy food with no agrochemicals, with no GMOs, and you have the right to mental, physical, and spiritual health. And this is much more holistic, and it's not that a hospital can give you. It's an entire lifestyle that you have to change. It's not going to happen overnight, as we haven't built this world as it is overnight. It's a historical process and should be a historical challenge for us, for our generation, to do this change, to start this change that is, above all, a cultural change.
Viva. Wow. It's after these, all of you, it's very hard to make a final point, but let me make three. Is the energy revolution really thoroughgoing within capitalism? Or as Naomi Klein told us on the first night, Viva, 25% renewable energy in Germany, but you hit a ceiling, and even the techniques of subsidies and the tariff innovations for solar run you up against that. This comrade says that the solution was in a distorted form in the 1940s when states planned in a very, very all-encompassing way. And although it's a tragic example, what we do know is that a major state replanning under an eco-socialist perspective would be the strategy for an energy revolution if within capitalism we hit these ceilings. A second question then is whether the redistributive process from north to south can be also strategized, planned properly. Currently, the Green Climate Fund that Hillary Clinton promised would have $100 billion per year is the closest that we've heard from the establishment of a redistributive mechanism. It's also known by the left as the greedy corporate fund because of the systems already in place in Korea, where it's headquartered, to create false solutions and subsidize other disastrous processes. So what would be the alternative redistributive? I find it in Germany. German Watch, an NGO, has a little film. Has anyone seen the film called The Bill? Yeah, it's excellent. Nick is saying, yeah, you must find that on YouTube, The Bill, because it points out that the extent to which Germans are wealthy is equivalent to the damage being done to people of Namibia. It concludes on such a poignant note. The Namibians, for example, have had a strategy that the Evangelische Kirche and IG Metall endorsed in a place called Ochevero, called the Basic Income Grant. Has that project ever been on your radar screen? It was in Der Spiegel, it was endorsed, academics have praised it as a way that for about €7 per month, major transfers and improvements in the standard of living of every individual, mostly in women-headed households because of the migrant labor system in Namibia. As a pilot, superb. The social redistributive aspects are critical. There's another German fingerprint on a pilot that was not so ultimately successful called Yasuni, which Alberto Acosta described. And he blamed, I think absolutely correctly, Kurt Niebel, the former liberal development minister, and he was trying to sabotage a grant system that would leave oil, about $10 billion worth of oil, in the soil in Ecuador, because Kurt Niebel and his mates wanted a carbon market and offsets instead. So then Rafael Correa, the president of Ecuador, went to the markets. There's a chance to rebuild these sorts of projects of north-south solidaristic relations that allow the northern consumer, the overconsumer, to have a good feeling of solidarity in making an ecological debt down payment in solidaristic ways that don't contribute to that problem but address it properly. Those are just two minor pilots, but there are so many more for all of you to explore with your international links. And third, finally, the most important solidarity is weakening the power of corporations in the North and states and even some multilateral institutions. I mean, there's a wonderful debate. Is the UNFCCC, the United Nations Climate Institute, itself so corrupted and caught within a Kyoto privatization neoliberal approach that we should now be not just walking out in Warsaw as NGOs, even with Greenpeace and others, but a more permanent and before Paris, decisive intervention to change the power balance. How do we change the power balance? The final point is that divestment seems to be where many in our movements have said we've had experiences to liberate South Africa in solidarity with activists on the ground, to remove money from the big corporations and especially the banks. Financing was the Achilles heel for apartheid. It had a big debt crisis in 1985. German banks, Deutsche Bank, part of it. The Swiss banks bailed them out. But anyway, the importance of this was very obvious because big capital got hurt when the logic of a carbon bubble, if you watch Carbon Tracker, works against it. So pulling away funds is what we've been asking in many of the southern sites that have had these struggles against dirty energy. I'd like to see more localization of economics and the experiences, especially where you in Bremerhaven tried to stop the expansion of the shipping industry, or in Köln where you're working so hard against coal. And those are the struggles of solidarity to globalize, while we deglobalize production and the overconsumption. I think those are the aspects of our politics that move us forward with confidence, with a lot of examples like our treatment action campaign defeating big pharmaceutical companies to liberate intellectual property, steel, so that we could increase our life expectancy the last 10 years from 52 to 62. Those experiences, defeating apartheid, defeating big pharma and the allied states and the WTO, have given me confidence that when we do say for an energy revolution, a climate justice project, and an end to capitalism, Amanda, way too.
So thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you for being here. For me, the discussion showed very clearly that any energy transformation is a double challenge, because first, we really need to resist against the fossil fuel capitalism we have at the moment, including all forms of extreme energy such as fracking and other new forms of energy. But secondly, we really need to develop alternatives. And this is, of course, the most difficult part. So thank you for being here and sharing thoughts. And yeah, in this way, I'm with Patrick, a bit romanticist. And I think, yeah, together we can do that. We can build alliances. We can go on. And thank you for sharing your thoughts and comments.